talk more about the strength-based approaches when encountering postpartum mood and anxiety disorders. So a lot of you are working in the home to support the family system, and the identified person that you are mainly working with is the family system and the child, and often supporting the parent, but not always having the time or the opportunities to really delve into what's happening for the parent. So hopefully after this talk, you'll have a little bit more insight into some of the detailed and nuances to be keeping your eyes out for in identifying a postpartum mood and anxiety disorder. A little bit about myself. I was very lucky to have a pretty privileged life. I didn't go unscathed without experiencing my own adverse childhood experiences, nor did my parents. I was a child of immigrants, and I think what's important when we're doing this work and we're talking about all the risk factors is to really focus on all of the healthy, thriving, vibrant people that we know who've overcome difficulties. I think that's a message of hope and resilience that we can give not only for ourselves, but for the individuals that we come across every day. When I had my very first job out of undergrad, it was working in Oakland. I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. I was literally on the streets of Oakland, and my role was to work with mothers who were incarcerated. At the time of their incarceration, they were either pregnant or they had children under the age of 2. And they were able to move into a facility that was inpatient while they were rehabilitating with other mothers, and they were receiving services. My role was to do intake with them. Intake evaluations with them, hearing their stories, doing developmental screenings with their children, and then following up with them, doing the same thing at 6 months and a year later. What became painstakingly obvious to me was that I was often the first person that they were telling their stories to, their harrowing journeys to, for the very first time. The impossible decisions that they had to make, which ultimately led them into the system. And so from that very first job, it became really clear to me that I wanted to get from behind the clipboard to be face-to-face and figure out how can I help and intervene these families in a different way from a prevention model. So that's what led me into my work as a researcher trying to get into graduate school. I worked at First 5, and some of the work that I did in postdoc, in my internship as well, was really focusing on 0 to 3. So we would do interventions with children, but we also got to work with their parents and the families. And what I learned to be true time and time again is that if a child were coming to us, if we are working with a child and they are struggling, there is a parent who is suffering. And often that suffering has not been addressed, and it's been unsupported. And there's been some intergenerational trauma that's been either passed down by epigenetics or by the dynamics that are playing out that we see when we are visiting in the homes or they're being dropped off at schools. Okay, so actually, let me go back a little bit. I have a little timeline here about myself, because it's important to see, right? Here I am after grad school. I'm enjoying life. I'm having a great time traveling, having fun, have a partner. And then there's this kind of chasm. So what happened here was a miscarriage. I experienced some infertility. And why it's important to name this, one is because it's so common and there's so much shame and stigma around it, but we're at about 1 in 4, 1 in 5 statistically of people who experience a miscarriage. That's a statistic, but it doesn't also tell you about the emotional impact that that has on someone, and then what they're carrying into them with hopefully their next child, right, or their next pregnancy. So I didn't know that that then predisposes you to a postpartum mood and anxiety disorder. That's a risk factor. Raise your hand if you knew that that was, hopefully some of you, that's a risk factor for a PMEDS, right? That's something that I don't know if that's on a screener that you're giving, but that might be something to ask, even if you're in conversation with someone. So at that time, I believe I was working at COM, and I started to really just deep dive into reproductive trauma, just to learn about it really from a critical lens. I was reading like all the manualized versions of treatment approaches, like what to know clinically about miscarriage and infertility. But that's when I learned about the whole field of maternal mental health. And it's a big field, it's growing, but it's pretty underfunded, and so there's a lot more to be done. So what are PMADs? So postpartum mood and anxiety disorders are any mental health disorders occurring during the perinatal period. So this is from conception to 1 year after delivery, or 1 year after loss of a pregnancy or child loss. It's important to note that usually an anxiety disorder or a depression has been present in someone's life before postpartum time occurs. So a lot of times we hear, yeah, people have a pretty fun, normal life, everything's easygoing, and then they get pregnant, and then they have a baby, and then they're depressed. That's typically not what happens. About 50% of the time there was some kind of pre-existing mood or anxiety disorder. So here are some national statistics, but we know that postpartum mood and anxiety disorder is far underdiagnosed and underreported, and we'll talk a little bit more about why. So we have perinatal depression at about 20%, perinatal anxiety 20%. From what I'm seeing in some statistics, and personally, is that anxiety is way higher right now than depression. OCD 16.9%, post-traumatic stress disorder 3 to 15%. That's a pretty wide range. I don't know if people know that they could be classified as that, right? You might think, what is that? Postpartum post-traumatic stress disorder. Perinatal psychosis is less than 1%. So I'm going to briefly go into risk factors. I do want to talk about trauma. That could be its own presentation. So I'm just briefly going to touch on it. Most of the people that we see likely will have had some type of trauma in their life. And likely if they're parenting, that trauma is going to show up in some way. Okay, important to note here that the DSM, if anyone here uses the DSM to classify postpartum depression, it doesn't capture PMADs very well because they say it's up to 4 weeks postpartum, which is, we just know that that's not what we see. That's not the postpartum time. So you might, after the 4 weeks, have to code it as a major depressive disorder, for example. So some of the risk factors: history, any history of depression or anxiety or any other mood disorder. You're going to be far more likely to experience postpartum mood and anxiety disorder. Or any history, if you have a history of PMADs with a previous pregnancy, you are like 50 times more likely to experience with the second or third. Any previous pregnancy or child losses, having a child or a baby with health conditions, any trauma history or other major life stressors. Likely a lot of the homes that you're going into, you can kind of see a lot of these stressors, and so it's kind of, it's a no-brainer that these can go hand in hand. Having a sick, colicky, or hard-to-soothe baby, so the temperament of the baby and the child can kind of exacerbate a postpartum mood or anxiety disorder. And lack of support. Lack of support is a big one. So I don't have any slides on single parents, but they are at a higher risk of PMADs as well as younger parents and people of color. So LA County recently did a survey, and 50% of Black and Latinx birthing parents endorsed postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety symptoms, 50%. So that LA County is not unlike us, right, statistically speaking. Let's talk a little bit about what it looks like. Okay, so I'm going to talk about what depression looks like specifically around this time, okay? So feelings of guilt or shame. Anyone here heard of mom guilt? Yeah, anyone here ever experienced mom guilt? Okay, so it can look like a mother feeling guilty for taking the day off to be at work at a summit where they're supposed to be learning, and they're like, oh, but my child's at home. It can be, in the very early stages, someone feeling guilty for wanting to go out and taking a walk and preferring to go for that walk rather than spending time with their baby. It can be feelings of shame around not getting it right or not feeling that connection right away, even though they're supposed to. It can feel They can feel really guilty for, I don't know, not having read like all the books that they're supposed to have read. It might feel really shaming. They might feel really guilty having someone in their home telling them all these things that they're supposed to know about how to engage with their child, and feeling like, oh, how did I not know that? How come I'm not getting it right? How come I don't have the energy or the desire to do the things that everyone's telling me to do? Okay. Lack of interest in the baby. Often this doesn't occur to someone to say, yeah, I don't have much interest in my baby. So this is why a lot of it goes underreported and underdiagnosed, but it can just be a feeling of like, I'm exhausted, and like, yes, I'll read to my baby, but I don't necessarily like want to get up and sing and play, and because this is part of depression, right? There can be a lack of like that desire to be really engaging and engaged. A sense of inadequacy we'll get to, but okay, how many people have been successful in life? They finally understand themselves, right? You're successful in your career, you have a partner, you're finally like in this stage of your life where you're like, I got this. And then all of a sudden, you're thrown into this thing where you're like, I have no idea what I'm doing here. And every turn of the corner, I'm being told I'm inadequate because I can't soothe my baby, she's still crying. Because there's a stack of dishes in the sink that I can't get to. Because every time I go to feed my baby, there's not enough milk. So there's negative reinforcement time and time again, indicating to the parent that they're not doing it right. They're not doing it well enough. If this is hitting home for you, that's okay. You know, it happens. If you need to, I've given presentations like this before, and people are like, you were talking to me. Yes, I'm talking to all of us. It's hard. This is really hard. If you are a mother or a birthing parent, can we just give you a round of applause? If you are a mom, if you're a birthing parent, there you go. That's what moms do. We just make it happen. We go back to where we're supposed to be, and we make it work. And we don't break a sweat. Okay.
We got this.
Okay. And then do I just press the... Thank you. Trouble with, isolation. Okay, so if you're someone who's like really prefers their alone time, like that's fine. But if you're someone who's really used to engaging with others, talking to your family on the phone all the time, but then you find yourself all of a sudden like not responding to texts or ignoring your sister's calls, or just when there's changes in the way that you're engaging with others, this is a sign that you might be experiencing some depression. Trouble concentrating and brain fog. This brain fog, like this is true and it's persistent and it's hard to manage, but if you find it's getting in the way of you interacting with your baby, that might be an indication that there's some depression going on, okay? Like, I'm trying to think of a good differentiation here. Like, yes, it's hard to think of all the things you have to do when you have a baby, right? But if you're like so removed, right? You're with your baby and they're in front of you, but you're so removed that you just don't feel present, that is kind of what that brain fog and depression looks and feels like during this time. Feelings of apathy and numbness, that's kind of what I was describing there, feeling removed from the baby. So you might be really interested in your baby. You might really love engaging with them and interacting with them. So when the screeners are asking you these questions, it's not going to come up on all those screeners because you really enjoy it, but you might actually feel really removed from it and kind of just not totally engaged. Lack of interest in joy and pleasurable things, not feeling like yourself. This is a hard one because all the things you used to like about yourself and the life that you had might not be available to you anymore, right? Like if you were someone who liked to go on long hikes, like not every baby likes to be in an ergo and sweaty, like, and then you try it and you fail and that really sucks. Or like if you like to sit down and go get coffee with friends and you have a baby that just doesn't like to be in the car seat, like it's hard because you're changing. And a lot of the things that you used to really enjoy are no longer enjoyable. But if the core kind of components of who you are as a person start to change, this might be something that's an indication. Or if people around you start to say that you've changed, that might be an indication, right? If your partner says, I noticed you're not, like I said, responding to your friend's texts. I noticed that you're not enjoying the meal that I just made you, right? Like the little things of who you are, if those are changing, those might be signs and symptoms. So if you're with a parent, you might ask them like, oh, what does your partner say about, this change? What does your mom say about what she's seen in you as a parent, right? So the crying and sadness, 2 weeks after birth, that's baby blues. Okay, so everyone talks about the baby blues, that'll pass after 2 weeks. So there's a huge hormonal shift. So during pregnancy, your estrogen goes like this, woo, and then the day after you have a baby, it goes 90%, plummets. So all of a sudden, your hormones are messing with your neurotransmitters, and your brain's like, what do I do? And so there's a lot of crying, there's a lot of depression, there's a lot of weepiness, there's a lot of joy, but there's a lot of instability. Usually around 2 weeks, that kind of equilibrium happens, but not for a postpartum depression. That can continue. So let's talk about the possible thoughts of harming your baby or oneself. I'll get to a statistic later, but suicide there's a huge risk of suicide during that postpartum year for mothers. Huge risk. And then thoughts of harming baby. So these are the things we hear when we think of postpartum depression. Thoughts of harming your baby, thoughts of harming yourself. Most people are not going to say, yeah, I think I have postpartum depression because of what we see in the media, right? First of all, thoughts of harming your baby are actually pretty common. They're called intrusive thoughts. Scary thoughts are pretty common. What's not common is being able to turn them off so that you can function. It's pretty common for a woman to say, I had a really scary image of grabbing a knife, and it made me really scared about having a knife around my baby. This is when you say, it's a really good thing that you're telling me, and it's a really good thing that you're scared, because that tells me that you would never do anything to harm your baby. And this is not something that is reportable. This is anxiety. This is a symptom of postpartum anxiety, maybe OCD. Let's talk more about this. Let's get you a referral. Let's talk to a therapist. Okay? If someone has thoughts of infanticide with plans of following through, and they believe that this is the right thing to do, this is an emergency, it's a 911, it's a hospitalization. That's less than 1% of the population, so this is not something that we'll need to delve into. So is there an understanding around that? So if someone's saying, I have really scary thoughts, yeah, it's really common to have scary thoughts. Every mom has them, every parent has them. Tell me about them, what are they? You're in a safe place, tell me what those scary thoughts are, right? Like, it's really common, like 20% of moms have these scary thoughts. It's really hard to stop them. So you want to be disarming, you want to be open, and you want to establish trust. Any questions about that? Okay. Moving into anxiety. So of course, some amount of anxiety is to be expected, right? You have a baby, you have children under your care, you are responsible for them. It'd be a little weird if you didn't have any anxiety around having a newborn or a baby in your life. But when it gets in the way of your functioning, around what your day-to-day expectations are for yourself, for your family, or at work, if you become overwhelmed to the point where you can't do the things that you want to do, that might be an indication of postpartum anxiety. And that it's, then moves into a mental health disorder. The good thing to keep in mind here is that when it does escalate to postpartum anxiety or depression, that is considered a disability, and that would extend the time of maternity leave or FMLA for someone if they needed more time before going back to work, or if it's within that year and they realize later, they can still take that time to seek the help that they need to get better. So what does it look like? Constant worry, okay? So I was 35 weeks pregnant, and I had a toddler at home, and I was in Postpartum Support International's training, and I was like looking at all these statistics, and I was like, oh, I had, this is my field, this is my passion. I didn't know I had postpartum anxiety. I thought I was just obsessed with her not sleeping, because she wasn't sleeping, so I wasn't sleeping, and so the only thing I could talk about was like, oh, you have a baby? Like, does your baby sleep? How does she sleep? What did you do? Did you do the this? What book did you read? No? Oh, okay. I'm like, oh, your baby's 16. Did she sleep? No? Okay, what did she do? It's hard, right? What do you do? Do you sleep? You nap at lunch too? Okay, great. So it was like, I didn't realize, right? I just yeah, all moms are tired, but it was really it was kind of the only thing that I could talk about. That was a sign of anxiety. I wish I would have known. I wish I would have known that, and I wish I would have known I was predisposed because of the miscarriage. Constant worrying. So you might ask, like, yeah, I worry about my baby. You're like, oh yeah, all parents worry about their baby. No, tell me what are your worries? I check them a lot. What does that look like? I look at the monitor all the time. I cannot sleep. When she's sleeping, I'm looking at the monitor. That's another indication. If you can't sleep when your baby's sleeping, that might be a sign of anxiety. Okay, so checking to see if the baby's sleeping, checking the monitor. If you have a mom who has like those things wrapped around their toes and they're always looking at the statistics and the oxygen level, might be some anxiety there. Feeling like a constant dread, like, okay, something bad might happen to my baby. If you don't trust yourself, or if you don't trust like someone that you trust ordinarily with anything else, if you're not trusting them with the baby, that might be a sign or indication. Those intrusive thoughts I talked about of possibly harming yourself or someone you love and you know you trust 100% possibly harming your baby. Any changes in sleep and appetite, difficulty sleeping while the baby sleeps, overwhelm and difficulty making decisions. Okay, so an example of this is like a mom whose baby is sleeping and she's like, okay, gotta get out. The doctor told me that I gotta get the baby out for a walk. We gotta go for a fresh walk. Okay, so I'm gonna get all the things I need in the bottle. Okay, what do I need? I need this, I need to get the bottle, I need to get that, what if she poops? I need to have the diaper and then the wipes and the bag, and then should I get that bag? What kind of shoes should I wear? Oh my God, I've spit up everywhere, I'm gonna change. Okay, and then, but what if, okay, the doctor calls, okay, did I fill out the forms right for my FMLA? Okay, and then the baby wakes up and you're like, I'm so exhausted, I can't even go outside right now. I'm so tired, because having anxiety is exhausting. So you're gonna see the fatigue because your brain is in fight, flight, freeze all the time, right? So the fatigue comes with the depression, it also comes with the anxiety. Mix that in with not sleeping, and it's really easy to see why this might get missed, but it's a symptom of postpartum anxiety as well. So you might get physical symptoms. So you might see someone coming into the doctor's office of like kind of restlessness, irritability, increased heart rate. Some people might say like I have digestive issues or difficulty breathing. Kind of those are some of the physical symptoms that you can see in anxiety. So why focus on PMADs? So it affects the whole family system. I'll show you how in the next slide. We already heard about attachment and why it's so important for brain development and for children's development. It's like the number one indicator. It's the first stepping stone for child's development is to have a healthy attachment. And if you have a mother or a birthing parent who is unwell, it's going to be really hard for that child to also be well, unless they have a lot of really other supportive caregivers involved. So here's the statistic. Suicide is the leading cause of death of birthing people in the first year after delivery. It's pretty shocking, right? It's shocking to me every time I read it, even though I know it. And there are huge societal costs. The fact that there hasn't been enough programming around postpartum mood and anxiety disorder and perinatal health, I see this as prevention. I see this as the first fundamental stepping stone for all of the work that you're all doing here in the room. This is prevention. I just put the CRQ code here. Mathematica did a study in California to look at the societal costs, billions and billions of dollars of untreated PMADs on the family system and societal costs in general. You can look up the study. It was from 2017, so we know then, right, that PMADs kind of plummeted. Maternal health plummeted after COVID. Here are some of the effects associated with untreated PMADs. So here we have the mother. So difficulty accessing basic needs, perinatal care, their visits, vitamins, medications, and sleep, which is why we have home health visitors, right? That really helps with that. Increased stress hormones, less likely to engage in eye contact, talking to baby, carrying and attuning, so there's the attachment, and less likely to start and continue breastfeeding. For the baby, we have preterm deliveries. They're more irritable, increased feeding difficulties, low birth weight, lower APGAR scores, neonatal hypoxia, decrease in quality of attachment. We know that a brain is molded to the relationship based on their attachment to their primary caregiver, right? So they're learning how to be in relationships. They're learning who am I as a person based on the person that's looking back at them. They're a little baby and they go, and if their mom's like this, okay. And if they're a little baby and they go, and the mom goes, oh my gosh, that was the cutest little giggle. That baby's like, I'm interesting. I'm exciting, right? So it's like step one, how do we get a parent that's experiencing depression or anxiety to get to a place where they can engage. So let's see, toxic stress in newborns, impairment in learning, behavioral difficulties, and mental and physical illness. In the child, we see these are the preschool years, negative effects on cognitive development, increased elevations of cortisol levels, increased anxiety and social inhibitions, behavioral disturbances, disruptions in social emotional development. We know this, right? These are all things that we see. If you're working with children, these are the things that you're kind of seeing in home, you're seeing at school, you're seeing in the offices. And then here's partners. I didn't talk about, I believe the current statistic is 1 in 10 men experience postpartum depression. But here are the effects if the mother has postpartum mood or anxiety disorder on the partner. Higher rates of depression, increased anger and conflict, increased irritability, increased frustration, increased risk of substance use, and more violent behaviors. So that's got some toxic stress for you right there. Okay. I think one thing I didn't mention was irritability, and anyone heard of like mom rage? So like that, heard of it, experienced it, I don't know. That I'll tell another personal story. I was like sitting there rocking my baby to sleep who didn't sleep, and I heard my husband like chomping on a chip in the other room. And I was like, I think I might hurt him. Like, I think I might hurt him. So like this irritability and like resentment, it's funny, but it's also an indication of a PMAD, okay? So let's get to the good stuff, okay? Here's some of the positive stuff. So we know ACEs are bad. We know that we're doing all that we can to increase positive childhood experiences. Many of you are doing this in the home already. But I want to just reiterate that parents are often managing their own triggers, right? Their own personal ACEs and their current life stressors. They have their own expectations, and they're either meeting them or they're not meeting their expectations. So there's either a sense of inadequacy, and then imagine someone coming into your home, okay, and saying like, tick, tick, tick. Okay, good, you're doing that right. Oh, your baby's not quite. Okay, just imagine what that feels like, you know. And so I'd like to kind of do the best that we can to come in and think about what can I do personally to disarm myself and join and talk more about the positives than what's not quite working. And I know that with the curriculums that you're using and the hearts that you bring into the homes that you're probably already doing this. So you're working to establish the caring and nurturing relationship. So you're kind of showing play, you might mimic it, and I know that you all have your own curriculum, you're doing your own thing, but what are the small, minute kind of changes you could do, right? So you might kind of show, you might see the parent do something that she's unaware of, and you're like, you play so well with him, like did you see how he just lit up when you touched his little toe, right? So you're noticing the nuanced interactions, and you're really kind of bringing light to what they're doing well. Or you might kind of show a little cute way to play with the baby. Do you have any lotion? Okay, let me rub it on the baby's hand. See how she likes it? You want to try it, right? So you're kind of bringing the mom in or the parent, and you're engaging them in something that feels good and something that, you know, hopefully is going well. Or the baby starts crying, and you're like, oh, that was really bad. The baby didn't like the lotion. You make it light, and you move on, right? You find something else to do. So predictable and nurturing environments. So if you live in a home where there's a lot of toxic stress, but you're a baby and you have a mom who is your anchor, who, amongst the chaos and the stress, will pick you up and will breathe in and out, and in and out, and her heartbeat is steady. That baby learns, I have a secure base that is warm and nurturing, and if the mom or the birthing parent or the other parent has calmed down and they decide, okay, I'm calm enough to walk outside, and I'm just going to keep soothing my baby. This baby has a nurturing environment and a predictable environment from a predictable person, right? They have this predictable environment, which is the centered person who can regulate their own emotions. This is something that can be done in therapy with the person. If a person doesn't have the self-regulation skills, these are relaxation tools that they can take and then teach their baby in tandem. And then a lot of what you're all doing, I know, is helping parents with the recognition, praise, and acceptance that they're showing their babies. And then if you have a parent who's so overwhelmed with anxiety or depressed that it's really hard for them just to even get up and mobilize, you can talk to them about the importance of saying, hey, right now it's not working for you. Who can we get in here to be a person that can connect with your baby? Who does your baby like to be around? You don't like being around your mom, that's fine, but does your baby? Okay. Have her come in and be with your baby and like do all the things so that you can have some time to rest. It's okay. They need a nurturing, they need some nurturance, they need that attachment, and it's okay if it can't be right now, who else can it be? So rather than telling mothers all about what they can do, or parents different than what they can do with their parents, let's first ask, what can we do to best support them? How can we wrap them in care? If you can just talk for 2 minutes with the person next to you and think about what challenges might you encounter. It might be your own biases or previous interactions you've had with those parents, maybe judgments, maybe all the other things that you have to do within your curriculum or the work that you're doing. What are some of the barriers that would get in the way of you changing your lens a bit to how can I enwrap this mother in care and support? And maybe there's no barriers, maybe you're already doing it. Okay, thank you for that. I think it's helpful to talk to the people that are actually doing the work that you're doing and think about, can we and how can we think first? What can we do to help them best support their children? Okay, I also just want to make a quick note that I've been saying mother a lot. When I say mother, I mean a birthing parent or a caregiver in general. Okay. So what can we do in our roles? So here is the motto of Postpartum Support International. This is not your fault. You are not alone, and with support, you will get better. This is not your fault, okay? So there are environmental stressors, there are biological issues going on, there are family issues, there are history, right? There are a whole host of issues taken together that then create the storm of postpartum mood and anxiety disorders. You're not alone. You know the statistics now. It's about 1 in 4. It's probably more like 1 in 3. If you were to sit down and talk to 3 other parents and ask them, did you experience a postpartum mood and anxiety disorder? At least one person is probably going to say, yeah, in hindsight. Most of the people that I see come in when their child is 2, and they say, I didn't realize, maybe they have a toddler, I didn't know that I had postpartum depression until now. And so they're grieving the process of maybe what they missed. Of the experiences that they missed because of the depression, or they had a trauma that occurred in childbirth that was never addressed because medically it wasn't, a trauma, but trauma is in the eye of the beholder. And they were then hypervigilant and in a PTSD mode, fight, flight, freeze for 2 years with their baby, and didn't know that they could settle, right? Finally, their body is completely depressed from being on fight, flight mode that whole time, and they really are finally looking back and saying, okay, now I need help. They were in survival mode. You're not alone, like I said, 1 in 4, 1 in 3, and with support you will get better. This is my favorite thing about PMADS, my favorite thing about my work. My private practice is never going to last because people get better really quickly. It's great. Like, honestly, if you get the right kind of targeted support for PMADS, some people get better within 1 to 2 sessions. But depending on what they're coming to you with, I had someone who had I'm not going to get into all the details of my work, but okay. But so like brief therapy models for like interpersonal psychotherapy, which addresses, it's an EBP for depression. It's an 8 to 12 session model. And then cognitive behavior therapy, you can do like a 4 to 10 session. So it really can be a brief model. It can be, you're going to be a mom or a parent forever. You can be in therapy forever. But it is really treatable. And I forgot to say that one of the biggest predictors of postpartum depression and anxiety is if you're experiencing it during pregnancy. So screening during pregnancy is crucial, and if you can support someone through that during pregnancy, they're going to be good to go for the postpartum time. One thing that you can do is really normalize the difficulties of parenting. Some of what you can do is join people, and you can kind of debunk these myths of parenthood, because a lot of time there's comparison and there's perfectionism. A lot of the clients that I see are perfectionists, and guess what? There's no way of being a perfect parent. So that sense of inadequacy is really, really high, and that overwhelm is huge. It's a good way to establish trust, too. I've been there. So let's look at some of these myths of motherhood. Every pregnancy is expected, wanted, and joy is the only acceptable emotion. Joy will come along, for sure. But look at all that you're dealing with physically, in your mind, right, psychologically, and then the overlap. I mean, you're going to have, so what we want to say is all emotions are welcome and expected and accepted. You will instantly fall in love with your baby and have a deep love and connection beyond compare. A lot of times it takes some time to grow. For a lot of people, it takes some time for that relationship to grow with their babies. A lot of times it's immediate, but not always. Someone might be so insecure and nervous that they might feel fearful that they're going to do something wrong with the baby. And so the baby can be a source of stress, right? Or that love sometimes can just take some time to grow. Breastfeeding is natural, and therefore it should be easy. So you have a baby, right? And saying, like, you might bond with your baby, you might want to be around them, but you also might not want to pick them up, because the minute they latch on you, they're going to barracuda on you. And so you actually just want them to sleep. You're like, yeah, I want to be around my baby, but I kind of just want them to sleep the whole time. There's a really high correlation between feeding issues and postpartum depression and anxiety. You're tired, you'll feel better once you get some rest. This is something that everyone will tell you, including doctors. So this woman is saying, how will I know if I have too much anxiety? And the doctor says, everything is fine, you just have a baby, it's normal to feel this way. And she says, oh, phew, wait, this is normal? You have no idea how bad it feels? Is it normal to stay up and check if the baby is still breathing every hour throughout the night? So ask more questions, right? Just ask more, elicit more details about it. You're tired, tell me about what's keeping you up. What are your thoughts? What are you thinking? The good parenting myth. So this comparison. Often people are comparing themselves to other parents, and they're thinking they're doing a better job than I am. Can anyone relate to this? Yeah. Another thing around stigma, a lot of people won't admit that they're having a hard time because you keep wanting and wishing, I'm going to get better. This is going to be better. Tomorrow I'm going to wake up and I'm going to do all the things. I'm going to have all the information. I'm going to be present. I'm going to be engaged. I'm going to take a shower and I'm going to go for a walk. And me and my baby are going to play and sing all day long. And I just got to work harder at it, right? And so most people are doing the best that they can. So it's really hard to admit, I'm not doing well enough. I'm not feeling well. Because if you're not feeling well, it's saying I'm not doing well enough, which isn't actually saying the same thing. It's just saying I need some support. If this hasn't been you, you haven't lived. Okay, this is living. This is parenthood. So if you haven't heard about the good enough parent, this is something that's really helpful to talk to about new parents. Because what we've known for generations, we've known ever since Winnicott, is the idea of the good enough parent. Okay, is that you can establish a secure attachment with the baby, and if you can respond to their needs and help them soothe, 50% of the time, you can establish a secure attachment. These research recently went above and beyond and looked at some nuances of the ways that people were responding to their babies, and they found that a secure-based provision, which was allowing the baby to explore and do their own thing and tumble, but being there to soothe them, that was far and away more predictive of a healthy attachment than a person who was there, like, sensitively, like, attuning to every little thing. Okay, so you are trying to help someone say, they can explore, they can be their own person, but you are there to soothe them. 50% of the time, that is pretty good. Here are my go-tos. So if someone's coming to you and they haven't had a chunk of time of 5 hours sleep, this is like a crisis. This is emergency. And you let them know there's a sense of urgency here. We need to make sure that tonight or tomorrow during the day you are getting 5 hours of sleep. You consult with their pediatrician, you have them talk to their pediatrician or their lactation consultant if there's feeding issues and if the baby isn't gaining weight to ensure that this can happen. And it doesn't have to happen every day, but they need 5 solid hours to reset. Okay, and this might actually help with milk production. If there's any lactation consultants here, I don't know, someone back me up. But crucial that they get these 5 hours. So you're going to work with them to accept that they need a village, accept the help, accept that there's someone that can come in, even if it's, someone that they don't necessarily love so much, but can be there for 5 hours while they sleep. Just writing down a list of contact people, like you would look in an emergency situation, like who are 5 people that you could call if you really needed them. Writing that list down with them. Talking about how it takes a village. You can't do this all alone, right? And there might be people you haven't spoken to in years, but right now is the time where you really need that. So really trying to break down those barriers, wrapping this person in a support of care. Okay. And then writing a to-do list. Okay, you have all these things on your mind. What are the things that you think that you need to do? Laundry, fold the laundry, do the dishes, wash the pump parts, whatever else, right? Pick up the kids, So they write it all down, and then they get to blame it on you. So when a visitor comes, you say, what can I do? What can I do for you? You say, actually, I'm working with this person, and they said I need to have you look at that list. I know it's really weird, and I know you want to hold the baby, but they said before you hold the baby to choose one thing on that list to do. Okay, so they take it off of, the onus is off of them, and you get to blame. So you can always blame the therapist. And then write down 5 things that day that you did to support your baby, even if it's fed them and changed them. Whatever it is, write down 5 things, because I guarantee you that a parent has done 5 things for their child, but they're not giving themselves credit for the things that they're doing. Being flexible with themselves on making it to things on time, or being able to do the things that they're wanting to do. Just increasing that flexibility and their expectations. Okay, I'm going to have you all stand up. And you can either imagine you're holding a baby or a purse or whatever you have near you. And I'm not a singer, so I'm going to have you all sing with me. Do you know This Little Light of Mine? Okay, so this is something that you can do when you're visiting someone. You can hold their baby, or you can have them hold your baby. And you can say, just do this for 2 minutes, okay? And you're going to sway. And you're going to sing, this little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Good job. Thank you. You did so well. Okay, if she's like, I don't know what to do with my baby, you just show her something. You get creative. Always instill hope and acknowledge what they are doing well. So this might look like your baby is in a onesie. Good job. It is cold. Good job getting them in that onesie. All right, it was a cold day. If they don't have them in the onesie, good job. You got them in the diaper. But you know what? Do you have a little onesie over there? And you put the onesie on, you're like, she's much better, right? So you're just kind of using and get creative and use what you're working with. Notice the small things, offer strategies and suggestions with modeling. Listen to this is huge. You're there to do so many things, but listen to their stories and validate. Whatever they're saying, you're just there to hear them. You may not have time to do any interventions, but just listening to their story. You might be the only person who's there to listen and to actually hear what happened to them and what they're going through. Link them to helpful resources, right? We have Postpartum Support International, has free online mother support groups or parent support groups with all sorts of different identities, and they have them every day, all different times of the day. We have Parent Education Program, we have Help Me Grow, and let's see. Any other resources out there you know of for mothers during the postpartum time that would be? Okay. Early Head Start home visiting. Thank you. Like I said, get creative, right? So a lot of parents are like, I know I'm supposed to read with them, but I don't know how to talk to them. It feels uncomfortable. Okay, well, what do you do with your time? You're like, I don't know, like I go on TikTok, and you're like, okay, what are you doing on TikTok? They're like, I don't know, I look at, okay, get the TikTok out, put it in front of the baby, and you're like, then you do this dance, and you're doing the TikTok that they're doing, and the baby all of a sudden is smiling. You're like, do what you want to do, have fun, and bring the baby in. The baby's going to look at you and think that you're the goofiest, funniest thing in the whole wide world, but you're just showing them little fun ways to get involved. And you can do that with them, right? So that they don't have to figure out how to do it themselves. Being compassionate and encouraging that self-compassion. Would you say that to your sister? Would you say that to your friend? I worked in the homes. At CALM, I worked in homes with parents. Before that, I worked with children and families, did all sorts of parenting programs with my manuals. And if there was one thing I could do differently and go back, is be a whole lot more compassionate with the parents that I was working with, because I had no idea what it was like. So I want to get you all paid. So if you're going from home to home, I want you to remember to get yourself paid, okay? Here's a little practice you can do from your car. So you can imagine that you're in your car, or you're going from one, meeting to the next, and you're just going to sit and close your eyes, and you're going to take 3 deep breaths in and out. You're just taking a pause, and you're acknowledging what you just saw, what you just heard, what you just felt, the limitations of what you can't do. You're going to acknowledge what you did do. You're going to identify how you're feeling now. You're going to identify maybe something that you need. And then you're going to describe that to someone that supports you. And you're going to debrief with either a friend, a colleague, or a supervisor. Okay, if you've closed your eyes, you can open them now. So thank you so much for all the work that you do. It's so important and it's so valuable, and thank you for having me here to join you all.